Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at Office Hours Global. Our first hour is general discussion. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about Foley. We got that coming up. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Lois, what do we got?
Andy Carluccio in San Francisco, California, says, why do so many people still toss a laptop pinning farm into a single Zoom meeting to produce a live event? With all the options now available, is there any good reason to still be doing this in 2022?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of good reasons. For one, a lot of people have already invested in the hardware. So you look at this guy from A to Z Productions. This is his pinning farm, and he's got not only a laptop but a secondary monitor. So that's how a lot of these pinning farms are working, where the second display is the clean aperture. So you pop out chat and you get a clean display. And then they've already invested in the decimator hardware. So that's one big reason. It does get kind of sloppy, but the other thing is that if one of those fails, no big deal. If your other one machine like Zoom ISO fails or your Zoom room fails, you're out. So a lot of people that are doing these big shows, if somebody pops in with WebEx, if somebody pops in with Teams, they can still accommodate. So there's still a lot of good reasons to have a pinning farm. Some of us are also heavily invested in Zoom rooms. So we can use Zoom rooms to do kind of the same thing, but we can't get into breakout rooms. So the benefit of screen scraping is that you can pop right into a breakout room and not have to have the host enable any kind of permission. So with a Zoom room, you'd have to get co-host. With Zoom ISO, you do have to get permission to record. So screen scraping gets around all those legal permissions. I know it's a Zoom thing, but those are some of the reasons that I came up with.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, that's what I'm observing too, is that we got kind of a mulligan early days of Zoom because we were all figuring it out. So you got some grace from a client, but now that you're promoting yourself as somebody that's providing a service, you kind of don't want to fix what ain't broke. And so unfortunately, they're going to hang on to, business people are going to hang on to something that they've sold a client that they can do for them. So the opportunity of developing something new, yes, is available, but again, you've already made a heavy investment, so it's going to take another big shift to move that, is my guess.
Yeah, we have a pretty big investment in the PCs that we got to do a lot of this work, and the only thing that's keeping us connected to that is the ISO audio return. So being able to get ISO audio, once that's gone, we'll never use it again. You know, like and we routinely just tell people it's very rare that I have to actually accept somebody via another platform at this point. I think in 2020, we had more of people being particular about it and everything else, but we usually just say, here's the link to the Zoom room. and we've been able to mostly just pressure everybody to do it with Zoom because the video quality is a lot better. And what we tell them basically is that you're going to be on a panel and there's going to be 4 other people that are on Zoom, and they're going to look twice as good as you do. So if you want to use WebEx or something else, it's your call, but we're just letting you know that you're going to be at a step below them. It's like being 6 inches shorter than all of them, all the time. So, and that usually shifts people's opinion pretty quickly, especially if there's someone who wants to sit on a stage. So we've been pretty blunt about the quality difference between them, and that has made a big difference. But again, Zoom, it's the ISO return is the only thing. Being able to talk to people individually as needed has been the only thing that's really holding those our Zoom rooms in place, because we're not in the cloud. We're not, we can turn them off any month. so we usually turn them off between heavy months, and the efficiency of Zoom ISO and the stability and all the other bits and pieces of it have really turned us over to wanting to use it. Next question. Did we lose Lois?
Lois, I think you're muted.
Richard Lavery from Belfast says the very impressive live stream from the Royal Opera House for World Ballet Day. Can the panel discuss the miking techniques used? And he provides a YouTube link.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So I just took a quick glance at this, and its ongoing live stream basically looks to be a large ballet dance rehearsal space, but they do have live musicians in there, and so A couple of people who are speaking are obviously mic'd with like a lav body mic, but if you look closely at the violin, they have what a lot of violinists do for amplification is a tiny, small DPA Omni. It's, I think, the 4061, similar to what is in their headset mic. And that's mounted right behind the bridge. And then there's probably some mics in the piano for amplification of that in the space and also taking that feed into the live stream. And then they just have a little bit of sort of probably shotguns out by the cameras that are picking up the room sound. So all that's being mixed.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I talked once at NAB to someone who had deep insider knowledge of how they do touring Broadway shows. And he told me, I actually asked him the question because I had seen a show, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat with Sam Harris. And he literally comes on stage in nothing but kind of a loincloth thing. And he was mic'd beautifully. And I said, how in the world do they do that? They obviously can't wear a body pack and anything. And sure enough, there was a body pack in the kind of a diaper thing that he was wearing, but they ran up a mic line and put a hair mic on him. And I guess hair mics are used a lot in Broadway. So it's that process of getting an individual isolated microphone integrated into the costume and making sure that every, at least feature performer, is on their own audio channel so that you can separate them out from everybody else when necessary.
Yeah, and a great video to watch related to this is Adam Savage did one for Hamilton on miking. And I'll put that in the event chat. But it was if you just do Adam Hamilton miking, you'll get it. It was done about 2 years ago. It's insane. Like just a really, really great breakdown of how they build the mics, how they work on the mics. And there's also a second one on mixing. And both of those are really amazing. Go ahead, Jeff.
Two of the Broadway ones that I've seen that I remember as being unique was Elphaba from Wicked has 3 mics in all because there's 2, one primary, one backup, again, hair mic mounted in the hair and then a body pack, and then a third mic for when the hat goes on because the hat messes up the other 2 mics. And the other one was the backup singers in Jersey Boys who play many, many roles, and they literally have to step off stage and step into a dressing room and change costumes in a few seconds. And so they have a bodysuit and a wig, and so they have their wireless transmitters actually mounted under their skull cap, which their wig covers. So that way they can put on any costume and you never see the body pack because it's always under their wig.
Next question.
Mitchell Hill from Wilmington, Delaware says, I have a client that wants to send RCA level outputs via Bluetooth transmitter about 50 feet to a receiver or powered speakers. What do you suggest?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I have a bunch of these out there. These are the Barracks Extremers, and the output is RCA, and the client decided that he wants to place music and sound from this barracks in the back room in the warehouse area. And he wants to use Bluetooth. I recommended against it because I think a pair of speaker wires or RCA wires in this case would actually work better than a Bluetooth into the...
Whoop, did we lose you there, Mitch?
I think he froze.
I think he froze there. It's one of those mornings. Go, Courtney.
Froze from using too many Bluetooth. I would advise against Bluetooth.
The back room, but I'm looking for, in order to answer his question.
Wow. He came back all of a sudden and
had so many things to say so quickly.
Burst of energy. Yeah. I would advise against Bluetooth. It's not very good for full frequency response transmission of music, but that may not be what you're looking for with just amplification. You can run 50 feet of RCA cables as long as you're not running them in parallel to any AC. It'd be better to convert it to balanced near the box and then run balanced lines out to an amplifier. Would be your best bet. Put transformers near the box and convert it to balanced lines before it makes the long run.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I know many on here have used the Rode Go. What's the transmission distance on that? Could that be a solution for Mitchell here?
Could do 50 feet if it was unencumbered. Oh, I will admit my Rode Go will make it. My kitchen is about 50 feet from my office, and I know the Rode Go will work there, but not all the time. But it's going through a couple walls on the way there, so it is. So I think that I don't think I would recommend a Rode Go. And Mitchell, is this a production, or is it just background music? And I don't know if Mitchell's here. I don't know if it's a production or whether it's just background music for a warehouse. And those two very different requirements there. If it's in production in front of a lot of people, then I would be very careful. If it is just warehouse stuff, I probably wouldn't worry about it as much. The other thing I would look at is, I don't know of anything specifically, but the first place that I would look for this kind of conversion is JK Audio. So JK Audio makes a ton of different converters that go from one place to the other, and I'd probably start there. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I'd be careful about the Rode Go and the DJI, because their line of sight, they're in the 2.4 gigahertz area, and that's very crowded with Wi-Fi and everything else. And plus, keeping them powered, because most of them have onboard lithium-ion batteries, and I'm not sure if they work while you plug them in and charge them, if they transmit while they're plugged in to be charging. So that would be a problem, because they'd run down after an hour or so.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says SpaceX invited photographers to set up, quote, remote cameras, unquote, near the Cape Canaveral landing zone. How would these cameras be controlled, and wouldn't there be issues with said remote controls in a congested RF environment?
Good, Courtney.
Well, if you've ever shot, I've shot at Cape Canaveral on the NASA property, and security is extremely tight. You can't even come onto the property without an escort, and you can't come on if you're not an American citizen. And so they tightly controlled access to the actual property itself. So if he's inviting people to Cape Canaveral to shoot that area, it would probably be a couple of miles away off the property. So you'd have to have a very long lens. And then since you're off the property, you could operate it yourself. You wouldn't need remote-controlled cameras. So I'm not sure what he was proposing there, Elon was proposing there, but remote cameras can be operated with long lenses from off the property. And if you are trying to control a camera with a remote, there's microwave systems that can do that. They can send remote controls, pan, tilt, zoom, and receive the video back from that with fairly little latency, so that you can actually control it and follow stuff. But it would have to be direct point-to-point microwave probably to achieve that without going through any kind of satellite or other networking.
Go ahead, Bill.
Alex brought in a friend of his, I guess, for the Blue Origin team, and we talked a little bit about rocketry. And what I was, the first thing that it left me with was the idea of sacrificial cameras. And it is anything you put anywhere near a rocket that is going off, it's probably not going to be there when you come back, and it may be atomized at that point because the forces are so strong. Also, just on a tiny micro level, when we did the last office hours space launch, I had a little GoPro that I put under the rocket just to see if I could get a POV of the rocket going up from the launch pad. And I was shocked when I looked back at the footage of how many little anomalies were in there. And the first one, I swear, looked like an RF hit. And I don't know whether a rocket engine causes any kind of weird pulse that messes up a signal, but it sure looked like that to me when I was reviewing the footage back. So I think there's much more technical difficulty in getting anywhere close to those kinds of things than you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, we the furthest that we've done, we've controlled a remote control camera is 6 miles, and that was a point-to-point microwave. It's a 1 gig connection, so it's just IP. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just as if you had an Ethernet cable there, as long as a bird doesn't fly in between it, which we have had issues with in the past. So I have a problem. I had a microwave on my house, and when the turkey vultures stood on the roof and opened up their wings for the sun, they would block my signal. So anyway, but the other thing is that while it's seemingly expensive for an individual, for production, sacrificing a $2,500 antenna is not that big of a deal. We've done a lot of things that are much worse. And so putting a camera out there, if you wanted to, with a microwave, if you could deal with all the security and so on and so forth, would totally be possible. And you'd be able to do a lot of remote control from there. It's just, again, just an IP connection at that point. You just lose all the hardware on the way through. But, we call that technical expendables. And oftentimes we just budget for it. And we've budgeted as much as $150,000 in technical expendables. So it just depends on what your budget is and what you can afford to lose. Next question.
Guy Cochran from Seattle, Washington asks, what hardware or software connection to a major network would be needed for an in-house studio, a recurring, quote, insert studio, unquote, to go to air?
Can you give us a little more color, Guy?
Yeah, I was in a meeting. We saw these things called the One Button Studio, which was mostly for recording in-house, but lately people have been asking to transmit with them, and it was never meant for that, but we'll accommodate. So we've been doing it for Zoom, but the other day we had a person that works with a lot of the networks, and he was saying, we need this to be able to go out. And I was like, well, what does that involve? And I remember you having pixel cores there was listed on, I think it was either the LTN PDF or the switch that said that you guys were a location. So I was wondering, do they give you the hardware, or
no, you buy
hardware?
it. You buy it or rent it. So the two major services to make that happen are, and they really lead. Well, there's three. So there is Media 3 in New York, liveshots.com. They provide a whole kit. It's kind of like the kit that you're talking about, but they build a whole kit for broadcast. And they're using a WebRTC backhaul, and then they put it into LTN or the switch. So they pump it through that system, and they mostly, but they make that available to corporations. But the two big ones are LTN and the switch. LTN is over the open internet, and the switch is over a private fiber network. And so you're going to pay a premium for the switch. It's going to, it depends on how far away you are from the POP. So wherever you're connecting, they're paying AT&T or Verizon for that long distance call. And so basically they have to get you to their network, and then they transmit it. And that's going to, typically there's a monthly cost. There's a cost for the port connection. And then there's a cost for the hardware that you're leasing, from them. And then there's a cost per minute. So it just depends on, so with the switch, it's about $6 a minute. With LTN, it's about $3 a minute to do it, and that's usually not that big of a deal if you're dealing with a network that's doing an 8-minute hit or a 12-minute hit. You might be on for 20 minutes before, and so it might end up being a couple $100 to be connected to it. The advantage of the switch over LTN is that it's about 1/5 the latency. so it is. Oh, wow. So if you're talking to a network, the switch can get down cross country. Can get down to less than 75 milliseconds, and often depending on what encoders are on each side, it can get down to 45 milliseconds a leg across the country. And so that's a 9. Now, to put that in perspective, the Zoom that we're in here right now is between 150 and 200, and that's approximately where. LTN sits between 150 and 250. So LTN is very close to the same as Zoom, higher quality than Zoom currently, but about the same latency. And the switch is going to be much lower latency and much higher quality. The switch is actually capable of sending uncompressed video across, from one place to the other. So if you want to do a green screen, for instance, you can literally send that uncompressed video all the way from one side to the other. But even their compressed version is like 250 megs a second. So it's an entirely different ball game when it comes to that. But LTN is probably the most popular among news organizations because it's easier to configure and it's a lot less expensive. So they're what were you say, Guy?
Yeah, in our area, there's only a handful. When I look at that PDF, there's like Microsoft, Cairo News, there's only a couple places. So in your experience, are they places where there's like a bunch of staff, or could it be handled with like just one or two people if the room was just there?
It's just one or two people,
Okay.
typically when you walk into an insert studio. So a lot of times, like if you go to Media 3, for instance, a good example in New York, and a lot of these ones are the same way. It's one booth after the other. So they'll usually if they're going to build the infrastructure, they'll just build a bunch of booths that are connected to it. So it'll be, now some places have one booth. That's very unusual because there's a lot of infrastructure and cost of running it. You might as well have, what you don't want to do is tell people they can't come. So usually what happens is they have a booth. They'll either use a green screen or a monitor behind them. So they'll put an 80-inch monitor, behind them. They'll tilt it just a little bit down so it doesn't pick up the lights, and it's all set up. It feels like a sound room. Some of them are actually isolated. So, if you go into the Eurovision in DC, which is where our facility was, those rooms were isolated from each other. So you could, because they were doing different broadcasts to each, to different European news organizations. And so, and they were using green screen. And what they'll do is that feed that goes behind them will either be supplied by the client. A lot of times, though, it's not a webcam, but it's some camera that's pointed that tells you it's Seattle, or it's, so you'd have you'd have all of the Space Needle, and you'd have the thing behind you. And so you find someplace, they're not necessarily in front of that. They just need that, but they often want a live feed from that. And so, the networks will want a live feed. The smaller, if you're doing what we call satellite media tours, SMTs, no one cares. These are like little broadcasts, So, but if you're doing the networks, they're going to want a live feed because it's quote unquote live. You're coming in, and that is really where you are from. But that camera, like in DC, if you see someone standing in front, if you see a long shot of the White House and someone standing in front of it, that is a camera that sits outside of the building at 16th and I and points at the thing and feeds that to everybody in DC. It gets the same feed. So they all get keyed in front of that. And so, or they put it in the monitor behind them. So it's something that's set up so that you can sit down, you can throw an IFB in. A lot of times they still have POTS lines, plain old telephone system, to make sure. A lot of the networks will want you to have a POTS line because it's a lower latency. They're slowly giving that up, but it's still something that you can't have an insert studio without a POTS line, currently. And so, and it is lower latency than Zoom, so it does make a difference. Anyways, and then you have, you have control of it. Usually most of them are some version of a PTZ camera. They're either a broadcast camera sitting on a telemetrics head, or they're a lot of them, you're using the Panasonic 150s are a really popular camera for that. Although if you wanted to flex now, if I was going to buy one, I would get the ZR7 from Sony if I wanted to do a flex on how things look.
FR7.
Sorry about that, not ZR7, FR7. I was just looking at San Diego had a news. I don't know why, got some link. One of the newscasts had a couple different people that were coming in remotely from them. And most people now come in from their own cameras. They don't even use insert studios. They're coming in over Zoom, or they're coming in over something else. And they had two candidates that they were talking to, and I don't know who they are. One was, I think, running for governor from Arizona. I don't pay attention to other states. I barely pay attention to this state. So I don't know who it is, but she's obviously her team obviously understands cameras and lighting. like it was like the best candidate I've ever seen. Like her picture was perfect. And then on another page, they had, some dude coming in from his kitchen. And I was just like, I'm going to post that later today, because it was a clear understanding of why it's important to look really good. When you're, it makes a difference in the level of authority that you have, and how people believe you is how it looks. And so I do think that there's a huge opportunity for insert studios. I think that the future is going to not just be insert studios, but remote nodes for virtual events. So being able to do an insert for broadcast, I think, is important. You want to have those tools there to do it. But I think you also want to look at, how do you have a telestrator and the ability to present and to be able to connect to Zoom and be able to do all those other things. If I was going to build a new one today, I would make sure that it was 4K capable, 60p capable. Not that you need that right now, but that I wouldn't invest in a system less than that. And then I would think about how I'm going to market that to people who want to come in. Like I'm most likely going to be speaking at Streaming Media West from here. So, because I was like, we just need to do this over Zoom. So that, anyway, that's that. I know I kind of over answered that question, but those are insert studios. It's a really interesting business. Next question. Sorry.
Jeff Powers from Madison, Wisconsin says, is there an overall document online somewhere that indicates which wireless microphone in-ear monitor RF frequencies are allowed in different countries?
Good guy.
Yeah, we use the Sennheiser Frequency Finder. That one will give you the pop-up for the country. So if you choose US, it'll then walk you through which ones are available and which ones need a license or not. And then Shure has some software as well as Electrosonics, where you can go in like Wireless Workbench, and you can go in there and you can actually designate the model number, and it'll tell you if I punch in my zip code, for example, it'll tell me what DTV stations are around, and that way I don't step on those. And then I still carry what's called an RF Explorer. It's a little device that once you get to the location, if it's not somewhere where there's a frequency coordinator, you can just pop that open and see if anybody else is on those. And some of the higher end, like our electrodes, we do a frequency scan, and it'll tell us, where there's some spikes into where to position your channels. So, but yeah, the frequency finder by Sennheiser, and I'll put a link in the chat.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Guys, got it all. I'll put the Shure link in the chat, and yeah, look at their website. It's got all the information, and everybody has software that you can carry with you that updates, and you put in your zip, your location, and it will tell you what are the frequencies that are already taken up and which are allowed.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, they've covered most of it. The other one I had mentioned is Electrosonics. This is what their table looks like. You can go through each of the individual blocks, and they're divided into different blocks for different areas of the country and different countries. And you can expand out each block and show the actual frequencies of the individual channels that are available in those blocks. But yeah, if you're traveling to a foreign country, I'd be careful, because the use of frequencies changes, especially since everybody changed over to digital transmission. So if you get an out-of-date chart, it may be not up to date, and depending upon whatever dictator came into control of that country, the frequency, the legalness of transmitting on a certain frequency may have changed. So make sure that before you go into a country, you check with the manufacturer of that wireless equipment, and they're the ones to check with to know if those frequencies that you have on that particular piece of equipment is legal in that particular country.
And Jeff, go ahead.
So it's important to point out, as Mickey put in the chat, that these databases tell you what's already taken as far as television and emergency services and those kind of things, but it doesn't really tell you what other people are using in that area. So that's what a scan is important for, because you could have other wireless users that you're going to conflict with, and they will not be on the database because that changes day to day.
And next question.
David Peskin from Miami, Florida. Elgato just announced the Facecam Pro, a 4K 60p FPS webcam, zoom and crop to pan tilt. I know we don't have it in hand yet, but wow. Companies are putting out some powerful webcams. When will we no longer need mirrorless or full frame cameras?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, we don't need them now because everyone has a 4K camera in their phone that has a phone made in the last couple of years. And that's what we're seeing now, is these webcams now are using the same chipsets that are put into the high-end phones. So you have the 4K sensor. It's fairly small, not the size of the standard sensor in a DSLR or a mirrorless 35 style type still camera, but we're eventually moving to that area. You can already shoot 4K images with any phone. So for webcam use, yeah, I see almost all webcams moving to 4K with built-in pan tilt, as long as we're not trying to send out a 4K image.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'm still a little concerned by the fact that most webcams are USB only. I'm not sure if this one is or is not, but if they are, then the only difficulty you might have is if you're using it with something like the ATEM little switchers that we all use. Not having the HDMI out means you're going to have to go through another layer to get that somehow translated into HDMI for use on a switcher.
Yeah, we'd have to take a look at it. I have to admit that I've become pretty committed to the Insta360s. They're the same price. And for the same price, I can do a lot more pan and tilt than just, frame, pan and scan. So this is, basically what this is providing is a zoom in and a pan and scan, but not really a pan tilt, in a true sense of it. And so I think at the same price, Elgato would really have to prove it to me, because the face, their earlier model, the face cam, I thought was junk. So I have one. It's sitting up here. I bought one, and it's junk. So I think that the thing that I would want to know is, I think Elgato makes a lot of good things. It's just that the face cam I thought was a face plant, and so the Pro would really have to prove to me that they can produce something that is a quality piece of material. It was the face cam itself. The first version felt like it was just an empty box with a little sensor in it. And so this one, we'll see how it goes. Sensor size is important, and I haven't seen in any of the reviews what the sensor size is. It needs to be at least a half an inch. If it's less than a half an inch, it's not going to be worth the $299. Next question.
Craig Kadoki from Toronto, Canada says, so after a long day at the salt mines, I came home to catch up with today's office hours on YouTube. Oddly, the audio on the recording is about 2 minutes and 15 seconds late. What happened? Is it preventable? And can the YouTube file be corrected?
Good guy.
When I went back to watch it shortly after, because I kind of had a fumble yesterday where I accidentally left that monster voice on for my second question, so I had to go back and look to see how it came out, and it was in line. The audio was still lined up, so I'm not sure if that was just on your end or if it was in the process of re-encoding or where that happened, but it was fine when I went back and checked it.
Yeah, I think a couple things got clipped out yesterday, and so that edit, sometimes when it's in the edit process, it shortens the video but not the audio, or it shortens the audio but not the video, and so it gets a little out of sync. I personally think we should just download them, fix them, and put them back up again. I don't really care about the views, the number of views on them. So if it was me, I would just take it down, put it up, put it back up. So we'll see. I think that the YouTube editing tools in there and the process that happens around it really creates a lot of confusion, especially for the first day, which is the only day that, where you get 90% of the views. So I think that maybe we should rethink how we're doing those updates. Next question.
Peter Belbin from Houston says, for a live audio-only show, what suggestions are there for remote contributors with smartphones to get great audio with the ability to control who is on air versus not? Sometimes multiple, sometimes one. TeamSpeak, Unity Comms, Mumble, something else?
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't know about the services, but I do know about the physics of it. And the biggest problem with phones as an audio recording thing is that they are used to being held to a face where the microphone on the phone is very close to the speaker. And in those circumstances, they can derive a pretty darn good signal-to-noise ratio. When you take it away from that circumstance and you're just using it as a camera in front of you, that distance, even though they have the best algorithms possible for trying to clear it up, you still don't get the full quality for an audio-only send like you would expect a radio station to sound like. So getting an actual microphone into your phone for me is the biggest thing. There are lightning adapters that will allow you to use XLR microphones and things like that with them. We've talked about the ones from Ceramic, and there are other companies that do that. But that's really the key to me. If you want it to sound like radio, you still need to get a decent microphone close to the person speaking and then get that into your phone to send it out into the stream.
Go ahead, Courtney.
There are various softwares for call-in studios designed to handle radio stations that have, on-air call-ins. Here's one I found called Call-In Studio. Cleverly enough, it's a cloud-based solution. So you register that cloud-based solution, and there's a producer that can control. You output a 800 number, a toll-free number, or a Skype-in number, and that allows people to call in, let you manage the callers before you put them on the air, and then routes them to an audio output when you select them. So something like that might be something to look for.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Angry Audio has some software and a few boxes that are great for interfacing your phone or for improving the quality of audio that goes through it. It could be done via Bluetooth or into the device.
And Mitch,
Angry Audio.
You're still breaking up, Mitch. I don't know what's going on there. It's a mess. Yeah, I think that the big thing that you want, if you can get it, is ISO audio and the ability for people to talk to each other. And so I think that my temptation would be probably to use Zoom ISO with the advanced audio. You're going to be able to push those all out of Dante to handle the folks on the far end. You do, as Bill said, want some kind of interface, either a Lightning to XLR interface, or what I use to get into calls is the Avio Bluetooth. So basically, it hooks up to my mixer, and then I have it just shows up as a Bluetooth mic. And if you want to surprise people at Clubhouse, show up with a studio mic and do that into the call. Anyway, so I think that solving the mic issue on the far end, and B, then finding a way that you're going to get isolated audio out live. And it's the isolated audio out live that is the trickier part of that puzzle to do it well. I will not produce a show with phone quality content ever again. It's unacceptable. Like, I won't even listen to it on the radio. When someone comes on, they call in. I don't care if it's the congressman, a congressman from wherever. I'm not going to listen to it. I just turn it off. I'm just like, I'm done. There's no excuse for that anymore. So, it's just give it up. Next question.
From Jeff Francis in Columbia, South Carolina. Zoom allows a system-wide mute-unmute hotkey, but I have to enable always show meeting controls to see if I am muted. Is there another tally option?
Go ahead, Serge.
Well, I don't know if it's exactly the tally option that you're looking for, but I'm using my Stream Deck with the Zoom plugin, and it's giving me a good feedback of if I'm muted or not.
Go ahead, Louis.
Well, I have names under everybody's little square in my gallery view, and next to the name there is either a red microphone with a line through it or not. So that's how I tell.
Next question.
John Nichols from Concord, California.
We missed
Zoom
one
IS.
there. Did you see the one that is
Oops,
above
hold
that?
on.
Yep.
Something jumped. Philippe Opalka from Brno, Chechnya, and please forgive me, Peter or Philippe. What interpreting system do you recommend for live spoken events? Have you built systems like this?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, in our church, we have the Listen Technologies LT800. It looks like this. It's just a transmitter. We have ours is Spanish. So people in the audience will get little belt packs and they can listen to the interpreter. So that's what it looks like. It's about $800. Again, that's a Listen LT-800 FM transmitter.
And in that case, you still have a live interpreter, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and a big thing that you have to think about is how many languages you're going to do. It's relatively easy to do one or two. It gets more complicated when you get 6. It jumps from like 1 or 2 to 6 because the UN 6. There's a lot of systems that are built around 6 channels, and then you go into the 10 and above, which gets much more complicated. Another question is it all for people that are in the room? As Guy was showing you there, that's interpretation for this is a live event. But the question is it live streaming or is it live in the room to make that actually work? The company that we, then the next thing you want to think about is, are they listening to it or is it captions? So, and captions get complicated because some of the languages aren't captionable live, like Mandarin and Hindi and so on and so forth. And so you want to think through that process too. A lot of us have leaned towards AI media /EEG for the captioning solutions. And what you can do is have whoever's native, whether it's English or Spanish or other languages that are captionable, you would have them type that in, and then you let the AI take over. And using an AI cap system, you can build a lot of different captions that are out there. If captioning is what you're trying to do, if you are trying to do it spoken word, then basically what you have to do is figure out a way to send that signal to your interpreters. And we've worked on systems where the interpreters are all on Unity comms. They literally are hearing in one channel and speaking into another. That all comes back. It's re-embedded into one SDI signal. That signal goes up into the cloud and then is split out into multiple streams to make that work. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. So those are the things to think about, though, is how many languages are they listening to it, or are they seeing captions? Is it in the room or is it live streamed? And if you have more questions about that, please go ahead and throw those in as we work on it. But those are some of the specifics that we need to give you a specific answer. Next question.
John Nichols from Concord, California. It's a Zoom ISO question. I have the DeckLink Duo 2 setup feeding into the ATEM SDI Extreme ISO and Dante into an X32. I'm looking for an effective way to record ISOs of both video and audio. Do I need a DAW? If new things are needed, sub $500 is preferred.
What you're probably going to want to do is send a mix for reference to the switcher, and then you can record using something like Boom Recorder, which is very inexpensive, over Dante to a laptop. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, the other DAW software I would recommend is Nuendo Live. It's very simple, just records tracks. That you would need that and Dante Virtual Sound Card for your computer.
Yeah. A boom recorder is something that we use, Reaper. And then I haven't used Nuendo, but I trust Jeff that it's great. Go ahead, Guy.
Does you really need anything? I thought that you could just pump the audio right in. It's SDI embedded audio through the Zoom ISO track. Can't you just pump it right into the Extreme ISO Extreme SDI with embedded audio?
You'd have to build. Go into the MIDI controls, and then you're gonna.
But you don't have to buy anything. You just route it.
You could.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would isolate those tracks. I will admit that I have very little experience or trust in the ATEM's ability to manage audio. So I would be trying to find another way to record the audio as well. Next question.
Serge from Montreal. Does anyone on the panel still use iPhone as video source in Keynote? Was able to do so a few months ago, but since then not working for me.
Javier.
Oh yeah, it's working for me. And actually right now, when you add the iPhone source, you can switch between the desk view and the regular the view. So I think if the continuity camera sees your camera, you can add it to Keynote without any problems.
Next question.
Chris Widener. Google's product graveyard is getting crowded. What product have they dropped that you miss the most?
Hangouts on Air. That's probably the one that I missed the most. It was great. It wasn't just the fact that it did Hangouts and then broadcast them. It was that it had a great SDK that was in the cloud, and we were able to do a lot of great things. I mean, I feel like we're just getting caught up with Zoom ISO now from where we were a decade ago. So I think that's probably the one that I missed the most. Next question.
James Haldane from Vancouver, Canada. Several months ago, Zoom was on the show. They said they were working on a feature that allows participants to participate in Zoom polls and chats without joining the meeting. This would be a perfect for a hybrid event. Has anyone heard any more on this?
Yeah, I don't know. That's what we use. I don't remember having that conversation, but that's what we use Makana for. Now is for hybrid events like that. Next question.
Tony Mobley from Noonan, Georgia. What does the Unity Comms icon look like in Stream Deck store? I can't find it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I'm not sure about the Stream Deck store, but the icon itself has the little yellow head with the headset on and a couple of antennas. Looks like that. So if you can find one that has that little logo on it, it's probably the official Unity Comms interface for the Stream Deck.
And it is a little quirky to set up on your Stream Deck, so definitely ask more questions once you get it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, has anyone used the Panasonic's Lumix BGH1 box camera? And how would you mount it on a monitor or desk? And he provides a link.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've owned that camera, and that's one that we're using currently on our One Button Studio builds. It's a sweet little camera. It's a box camera, and we use a special mount, but the one that you could use is just something like a Manfrotto Magic Arm with a 1/4-20 plate that you can slide around, and then a super clamp or something to clamp it onto your desk. That would be a pretty good solution, and that's a sweet camera.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yeah, we were using that on a tennis court just a week ago down in San Diego, and it does have the 1/4-20s on the bottom, and it was a very sweet camera. But again, a lot of the controls are hidden, but it puts out a great picture.
Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana says, Auto-Technica. Oh, here's a quotation. Auto-Technica resurrects its Soundburger portable turntable from the 80s. This was a great headline to see today. I know what my wife's getting for Christmas. What other portable turntables have you liked?
Go ahead, Jeff.
First of all, if anyone doesn't remember this, go Google it because it's kind of hilarious. But I don't like any portable turntables. But if you're looking for an inexpensive one that works, it's the Crosley portable turntable. It's really inexpensive. It's not a high-end turntable. Don't put your favorite records on any low-end turntable because they do wear out. But it's a nice portable turntable. It has Bluetooth and an aux input, so you can use it just as a sound system with your phone as well.
And, I think that portable is relative, and I find that the MK1200 is portable with the correct casing. So anyway, next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vera, Florida says, what are the best office hours training options for those working during the week?
We have had more going on the weekends, and it's just a matter of volunteering, folks who want to volunteer. I think that typically this picks up during the U.S. winter, so because we have more time to do things. I think we'll have more stuff on the weekends, but I admit that we did do a lot more on Saturdays, but my daughter asserted herself. So in pre-COVID of stuff that we used to do, so I've been less available. So it's just been a matter of figuring out who will take that torch. So that's been the issue there. Next question. Lois. We can't hear you.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington asks, what would be a good macro lens for a BMPC 6K Pro?
Guy.
Yeah, the one I like is the Canon 100 millimeter macro, but then use the extender. It's called gosh, I can't remember the name of the exact extender. I'll put it in the chat when I find it. But this is some footage that I shot with it. You could see that these are little tiny buttons on a monitor, and with that thing, I mean, it was amazing to be able to punch in. So whenever I have a product that has really small buttons like that, or really small things to get into, I use that Canon 100 millimeter macro with the EF extender. I think it's a 2.0 extender, and that's popular among macro photography folks. That's like the go-to setup. But don't just get the 100 millimeter macro. You got to get the extender too to really make it work.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
I want to make sure it'll shoot eggs. We're filming for the Graham Care film, so
you want to shoot eggs?
I want to shoot eggs.
How close do you need to get?
Apparently,
to the
very close. The director wants to get up close and personal with those eggs, so it's a part of it.
Stop by the studio. I'll let you borrow that lens and set up.
Copy.
I've been looking at some of the macro stuff that uses bellows, which I'm getting. Yeah, I'm just saying a word.
Well, I wanted to do a tilt shift, but that's maybe a little over the top.
Yeah, good, Bill.
I was just going to mention that a lot of the macro lenses have, you get longer lenses that have a macro function, and then they're macro lenses. And then there's the tilt shift lenses they use for architecture. And that is a circumstance where if you're in front of a building shooting up at it, you get that parallax, and a tilt shift lens will allow you to compensate for that and kind of stretch the top of the building out. Fascinating. And bellows cameras do the same kind of thing. You can actually change the geometry of the shot by changing the aspect of the lens toward the plate that is being exposed. Fascinating. Photography is fascinating.
It's a bucket list for me to have a bellows. It's Novaflex makes bellows that will fit onto they're just Canon mounts and Sony E mounts and lots of other mounts, but Novaflex bellows. If you just do search for Novaflex bellows, it's definitely something that I have on my list of things. I about once every quarter I go, I'm going to get one, and then I think of all the other things I got to buy because before I buy that and I put it off again.
Would they make eggs look really good?
I bet you they would. I bet you they would. I bet you they would look eggs look amazing. All right. Next question.
Colin Mulcahy from Dublin, Ireland says, with a hesitation in using an Echo 3 with more than one DeckLink card with Zoom ISO, should I still buy the Echo 3 over the Echo 1 for other cards, i.e. Dante PCI, instead of using DVS? Building rigs for various scenarios of using Zoom ISO.
I'll be honest, I still think that the form factor that I'm most interested in is an 8 gig Mac Mini with one quad card, in a 1U rig is just like, to me, I guess I like to think about things being, like 1U, I'm going to stick it in. I'm just going to keep stacking those up, and I would, keep specializing that way. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it depends on if you want to future-proof yourself, because, that's almost twice the price. So if you wanted to add one 8-port card and then add a second one because you get an Ultra or a Max later on, then you could still use that same enclosure. And now you could add 16 or maybe even 24. And so that's on the horizon. We'll see what happens at Zoomtopia. The other thing is, if you do decide to go NDI or something like that, you could throw a 10 gig card in there as well. And so that will give you that option. And there might be something else that comes out in the future. So it's really, I'm on the same boat. So I'm trying to figure it out myself. I'm going to buy both and figure out which one I'm going to keep.
And
and the rack mount unit.
We've
So
definitely been
all three.
testing. Yeah, we've definitely been testing them that way. It's just that when you look at the actual cost effectiveness per unit, the studio is actually much more expensive to implement, with even if you had two of those cards, than just, if you got a studio and two cards, your two Mac Mini setups would probably be still less expensive than that. So I think that per output, the cost is still better with the Mac Minis than they are. And you don't need the 16 gig Mac Mini because the 8 gig is just rocking it. It doesn't need it at all. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, IMAX is extending the IMAX Live brand with the Colorado Avalanche and Columbus Blue Jackets game from Finland. Wouldn't most cinema cameras or lenses not be durable enough for sports? And how would you mic or mix hockey in an immersive format?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, if you're concerned about stability, maybe you're talking about getting the camera out on the ice with the hockey players. And any camera you put out there, you just have to assume it's going to be expendable at some point, because that is a rough sport and people are moving real fast. And as good as those athletes are, your momentum on skates is not something you can just suddenly change direction super easily. So I would be very careful about that. Also in the sound thing, boy, the post amount of bleeping you would have to do in most of the hockey players that I've known would be extensive.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, they'd probably have to use a box lens with typical Fujinon, like it's used with regular sports type video cameras, because it's a very fast sport, and I don't know if the IMAX sensor is going to lend itself really well to covering this because of its narrow depth of field, because it's such a large sensor. It might be problematic to try and follow focus on a long lens, especially on something as fast moving as hockey. So I'm not sure how they're going to handle it. Maybe they're going to use it with different cameras than the regular IMAX digital cameras.
Next question.
Mitchell Hill. Can we talk about, quote, center channel buildup, unquote, when switching original sound on?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So this goes back to the pan law. So we have a single mono source, like me talking through a microphone, but it's heading out to two channels. And so we have to make a decision about how loud that one signal will go to the left and the right channels. And the common way that consoles and DAWs and do this is through the pan law, which says when you pan at center, it drops 3 decibels to the left and the right. That's because when we hear things through speakers in the air, they add together by their powers because they're not correlated, so they get about 3 dB louder. So that should be, as you pan from left to center to right, my voice should be the same apparent loudness to the listener. When that gets summed to mono, however, not in the air, but in a digital system, then it gets 6 dB louder because 6 dB is an amplitude doubling. So when you take a mono signal that has been pan center, it's 3 dB down in both, so it ends up being 3 dB louder because it's -3, and then you get +6 by the summation of mono. Hope that makes sense.
That was a good explanation.
That's great. That's great. Next question.
And Jeff Francis from Columbia, South Carolina. Can I fake my 16-inch M1 MBP display at 3456 by 2234 to display 4K at 3840 by 2160 so I can do a screen capture of software at 4K?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Kai.
I don't think you can fake it. You might have to use Switch Rose X or something along those lines. Those have not been super stable though on the M1s. They used to be on the old school Intel stuff. You might be able to just hook up an external 4K display, have the HDMI handshake take place, and then go ahead and you're going to have to mirror displays, and then you can capture, and that'll do it. If you don't have a 4K display laying around, you can go on Amazon and get a couple of those HDMI dummy 4K. I have one right here. They're like $10, and then that'll force it as well.
Good, Bill.
On some of the monitors, I have the Marshalls particularly, you can put it into a mode called one-to-one display, and then basically whatever pixels are coming in, it maps 1 pixel to 1 pixel without any scaling or stretching or anything else. The issue is that there's so many resolutions, and our computers, our laptops have to deal with so many things that there are a lot of settings actually. Some people have noticed that when they brought in an external source into their laptop and it suddenly gets a bit bigger or a bit smaller, that's probably mapping pixels. So that one-to-one pixel feature I've actually found useful. I'd probably run it through an external monitor to get into one-to-one, and then I would know that I was getting each pixel of that 3840 by 2160.
Next question.
Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri says, wanting some way to get a physical slider version of the Windows volume mixer on my PC. Would the PC Panel Pro or the Go XR Mini? And then he has links to those.
Windows volume mixer. I'm afraid that you may have stumped the panel. I'm not
I think he's
certain.
looking for remote control of the Windows volume mixer from a hardware slider, and that we would need to dive into these to see whether that actually can control that.
Yeah, I don't know. You might have stumped us on that one. Sorry about that. Next question.
From Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Got my new Mac Ultra Studio. If I wanted to play around with 3D rendering, is there any caveats I need to keep in mind?
The main thing is that you got to decide what kind of 3D you want to play with. So Blender, of course, is going to be the least expensive solution for you, and it's a pretty capable app. The app that I use on a day-to-day basis is Cinema 4D, and I've been using it for 20 years, so it's just easier for me to use that one there. And so it just depends on those are the two main apps that I would probably look at related to rendering. The thing that will test your processor are things like lots of polygons and global illumination. So if you turn global illumination on, that calculation is much more complicated than most of the other ones. The other thing that will start to make it slower is the anti-aliasing. You turn that up, things look smoother and more real, but it also they take a lot longer to render because basically they're oversampling. They're rendering. If you have 4 times oversampling for HD, you're building a giant 16K or 8K solution and then scaling it back down again. So those are things to think about there, but have fun and ask questions. Next question.
Harshid from Daytona Beach, Florida asks, anyone familiar with the Connect 6 by Lewitt?
I don't know what that is. So I guess the answer is...
it's a USB audio interface.
Interesting.
I'm assuming it's the one Lewitt, the spelling Lewitt. So I've not used it. It's certainly got a really cool form factor, and it looks like it has some good software along with it. I'm familiar with their microphones and have a pretty good reputation. So if you get it, let us know.
Are these the microphones that basically can do lots of different...
Lewitt is predominantly a microphone manufacturer, but here's the Connect 6, which has the volume control. It's kind of like a Rodecaster or some of the other Presonus type devices where you got your XLR ins that you can also use with instruments because it's a Neutrik connector. You can put a 1/4 inch directly in. So then you can hook up speakers as well. And then you can put in a mobile device. USB-C. I don't know how great this one is. Lewitt's a pretty good microphone manufacturer. I don't know how good their interface is, though. They're probably using somebody else and branding it as their own. It's a lot of money to make these in-house, so we'll see. You should get one.
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, I thought this was they're one of the manufacturers that make ones that let you model a lot of different microphones or model different microphone styles. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, I was just showing it earlier, but yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I haven't used one. I'm not sure if it has a fairly limited number of inputs, so I'd kind of shy away from it for that.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vera, Florida, puts in a link and then says, FYI, nice set of online Cine tools here. Nice format compare tool.
All right, we'll have to take a look at that. I'm afraid that... Yeah, I guess we came in early. We just didn't get a lot of... go ahead, Bill.
I went and took a look at it. So somebody has put together a page that is very clean looking up front, and it gives you a whole bunch of different clickable links, and most of them are calculators. So there's a lot of math kind of in the formula. Yep. You put in this focal length at that thing, and it gives you a result. I haven't ever tested it, but it looks like there's a really nice set of tools there. So I agree.
Yep. Last question for the hour.
Jonas Dautar from Stuttgart says, over the last couple, I was not able to pull 1080p from the ZISO test room. Is there going to be a room for people to test 720p soon that is separate?
Probably in December. so we're probably not going to be able to do that anytime. It takes time to actually set those up. All right. We are now changing subjects. We're super excited. In another life, if I had been able to do what I wanted to do, I would have been a Foley artist. Like I just think it's magical. I remember I did a voiceover at one time, and they took me into the Foley room at Lucasfilm. It's in this little building behind the main house, and I just walked in, and there were all these toys, toys that made noise, and I was like, oh my gosh, how do I get a job doing this? And so we're really, really excited to have David Fein and Greg Curda on. Greg has been here for quite a few times, and he's one of our long-term members. And David, you're new. You're brand new to our little club.
And thank you for having me. This is exciting. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about this. So, Greg, I'm going to let you kick it off and talk a little bit about Foley. Can you hear me, Greg?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where all the buttons are. I got to tell you, Alex, probably for the first time, I'm like nervous.
Not like you have any friends here, Greg.
No, I know that. But it was like, it's the pre-staging and the way you guys have built up the show to this point. And
when Greg started before, when he first came on, we was kind of like, he just popped in like here's Greg, and we've grown a little bit since last time.
Yeah, and I had this like funky kind of a paisley background, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Anyway, it is my absolute great pleasure to have my longtime partner David Fein with us today. David and I worked together for a number of years at Paramount, and we had just a string of hits. It was like one after the other, and we just we worked days, nights, weekends. David bought 3 houses, I think, during that time, and we had a good time. So, I guess for anybody that doesn't know, how far out of sync am I? Foley is the art of creating sound effects in a studio live to picture. And it's the live to picture part that really defines Foley, because otherwise it would be simply creating sound effects. But now you're working with a picture, and you're trying to recreate exactly what the motion is on screen. And it takes a very, very special kind of person to be able to do that. And there's a lot of guys that do Foley now that really didn't know that they could do it. And I think David, our ex-partner Ken, was one of these people. He was a projectionist, and he got, is that right? He got called in.
I just did a story on him because Ken, of course, recently passed away. But Ken was a projectionist, and that was out of high school. And I believe his dad was, so it was kind of a legacy job for him. He was on the stage. The guys had reached retirement age, and they wanted to pass the stage on to somebody, and they vetted people for 2 years running and didn't find anybody who they felt confident with. And they turned to Ken one day and they said, man, you've been here for years. You know what's going on. Try it. And he tried it, and he nailed it first shot, nailed it the second shot. And they said, yeah, okay, you're the Foley guy. And so he was there. I joined in about a month later. I try out for it, but it was a job at one time that was opened up each 1 or 2 generations. Really, we were taking over for guys who had been there for for decades.
Yeah. And the typical path to Foley artist was really from a sound effects editor's standpoint.
So you started out as a sound effects editor, and then you'd end up doing it yourself, or is that how do people find their way into it?
Everybody has a different story about that.
I worked on a game, and I did all the sound effects for this game in 1994, and it was all at my desk. I had a sound designer, and I sat there in a microphone, and I literally, like, when appearing was. And then I was thinking, it was like half of them were my mouth voices, and I was like, "This is so much fun." I couldn't find a way to get a job doing that, but evidently, if I was in LA, I would have been able to. So it's just that everybody finds a different path. It's just is there a school for Foley?
No, well, actually, at Chapman University here, which is in Orange, and one of our buddies, Harry Cheney, teaches there. We help design an actual Foley stage. They have a working Foley stage, and he does give courses in Foley. He gives it in sound in general, but Foley specifically, there are courses for it. So, that's one of the only ways. And as far as people getting in, there are ex-professional athletes, there are ex-dancers, there are people who just rolled into it, there are people whose parents might have done it now. As I say, I think there are individual stories. I learned it real quick. A friend of mine was doing a feature. I was on the feature from really beginning to end, doing different things. I was in the editing room, and so that was my mentorship with post-production sound, as well as picture, because we went through with that. And one day, Earl, our editor, said, "Hey, we're going to go do some Foley. Let's cue up the show." And I had no idea what it was, and then and I got into it that way, and it went from there. So.
I think that it's something that is the film industry, while there are schools and everything else, so much of the film industry is you're just in the right, like you go there, you show up, and you start being useful, and you slowly find your path. And it's almost all experience. It's not, it has very little, there's obviously paths like USC for directors and other things like that, but that smooth things out a little bit. But I think in a lot of the yeoman work that a lot of us do, the below the line, it very much is something that you just showed up and started carrying things around, and the next thing you know, you're doing something. Has that been your experience?
That is, a student sometimes asks that, like, how to get in and all, and without joking, I say, well, can you give a year to making yourself a pest? That it won't be a studio, but make coffee. I mean, really take the trash out, ingratiate yourself with people, and as they get to know you, you yourself will know what you might want to do, and you can start getting friendly with people who do it. Generally, people, if you ask them, they'll show you something, and you work into it that way. But it is completely seat of the pants. I came out of film school. We had started, four of us had started a production company during film school. It took us after film school. So we did a lot of film, but we also got each other jobs. So it was a buffer for us. And again, you're there at a point and somebody says, "Hey, we need somebody down here," et cetera, et cetera.
What makes a good Foley artist a good Foley artist?
I think number one, attention to detail. Okay, I mean, whatever anybody does, there's attention to detail, but it has to be that sound detail to be able to solve problems quickly in a physical sense, whether it's with your body or with grabbing props, and then being able to extrapolate, okay, what can I get in the back room and the prop room that'll make a particular sound, and being able to do all of that real quickly. The other thing that I've always thought is to keep in shape, because over the course of my work had all been studio, almost all of it. you're dealing, 1 week you'll be on a feature, the next week you'll be on a low budget feature, then you'll be doing M&Es, then you'll be doing TV show episodics and all. Number one, the flow is very quickly. Number two, you have to adjust your workday very quickly. But the prime thing is that you gotta knock it out quick. So you have to be able to know where to pick your battle.
And what's the difference between working on a big feature and some kind of series for TV?
Time and what you can spend, and of course you don't have an open book with time on a feature either. Schedules have gotten tighter basically over the years with feature. We were down to knocking out a feature in about 5 days, between 4 and 6 days. If it's a big tentpole film, then you can still get weeks. And I think during the 80s, I can remember spending weeks on a show, but that is no more. That is no more. So and so then, qualitative wise, you may have to say, okay, that's good sooner on a TV show than you would on a feature, because you just have to move faster.
Yeah, you gonna say something, Greg?
Well, I was going to say a couple of things. One, that I think we can quote a particular show that may have had something to do with the shortening of schedules globally. Should we do that now?
Yeah. What was that show?
Hunt for Red October, my friend.
Now, what happened? Why did it make the difference?
Okay. Well, first of all, for those that don't know, Hunt for Red October, I guess it was 1990, wasn't it, Dave? Won the Academy Award for Best Sound Effects. And previously, the shows that had won in the previous years were all big effects shows. And, we think that partially, it might have been because people were tired of having their ears assaulted, constantly. But what happened is that production went so far over that the vice president of Paramount called everybody in post into the theater for a general meeting. And it was kind of a one for the Gipper type speech. And he said, boys, we're under the gun here. Obviously, release date has not changed. We have roughly half the time that we had scheduled for this show. So everybody was on it days, nights, weekends, holidays. It was like, say goodbye to your loved ones. You'll see them in several months, Yeah. And we did. And not only did we do it in half the time, we won an Academy Award for it. So the producers are saying,
That's the problem. It's always the inflation of expectations.
Well, no, because it was right after that show that things started to change.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of extrapolating a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Courtney?
Yeah, and some things people don't realize is that especially a movie like Hunt for Red October that take place on a submarine, majority of it, that submarine set is all built plywood on a soundstage, and footsteps sound like thud, 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 and almost everything has to be replaced because none of it sounds realistic for the environment that they're supposed to be in. So I imagine there was a heck of a lot of Foley needed. And also I know the DP, having worked with him for 3 years, and he talks a lot during the shots, and we have to filter him out by replacing all the sound.
Well, it was lucky for him because those subs were actually constructed on giant metal motorized gimbals that were insanely loud.
Right.
I don't think there was any more than 10% production dialogue in that show.
Yeah. Well, and how much production dialogue is there in a lot of shows? It seems like in American shows, it seems like it's very little, unless it's Soderbergh, who hates ADR.
Well, I think it depends. And on bigger budget shows, the ADR has gotten so much better, and they're able to match it much better. And there's all these new tools. Isotope has a brand new, they call it dialogue match. it's absolutely insane. You could take, for instance, the ambience of your perfect boom track,
Right.
and it copies that sound print, and you could paste it onto a lav that sounds terrible, and it'll make it sound like the boom track. And they use this all the time for ADR now, and so it's much easier to match this stuff. So, and if you have actors that are good at it, it's not really costing that much because they're moving quickly. You know, a lot of guys still do wild dialogue on the set and then plug it in, you know, or they steal, you know, editors steal from other takes and plug it in.
Right.
You know, but on the low budget ones, you know, that's where you really have to plan it out a little better, and that's where a lot of that wild dialogue comes in handy.
You know, it's funny because one of the things that my kids notice that they can look at a trailer and know whether it's a big budget or small budget film just by watching the trailer. And they were asking me, why can we tell that? Like, why can we tell that? And it was lighting and sound. Like the lighting and sound design of a big budget film is entirely different than small budgets. You know, and so, you know, and I think that the sound design is so, it feels, when you're used to a big feature, it feels the Foley and the sound design adds so much depth to it and so much richness to what you're watching. And when you don't have a big budget, you don't have that happening. And I think that a lot of times it just doesn't, you know, it feels small, you know, for a lot of these films.
You know, and part of what drives the amount of work in a Foley job, you know, aside from the financials and how much time you're given, is what does your ADR schedule look like? How much of the show are you replacing? Because anything that you ADR, you have to cover 100% in Foley.
Right.
Okay. Because all that background has to be replaced. And certainly, you know, if they're using a lot of production and they're using a lot of production effects, then you also have to worry about the foreign versions, because you have to produce what we call an M&E, music and effects. And that music and effects track has to be complete without dialogue. It's like you did a little dialogue minus. Right. But if they're using production effects from dialogue that they're not able to strip out of the actual dialogue, you've got holes that you have to fill, right? So
not yet. We just got this software. You know, a lot of the software now is just live, you know, for songs, just taking everything, just separating out all the tracks for you and using AI. And I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting to see what happens next, you know, as that goes through. We have a ton of questions stacking up, so let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Let's go to the first question.
Sky Schuler from Seattle, Sky Gleason from Seattle says, could the panel discuss the different terms and when they are used? Sound design, Foley, mix to picks, others?
How would you guys define that?
I'll take the Foley is just that. It's just what Greg is saying is what we do on the stage with different surfaces and different props in sync with the film. Of course, we could do it wild also. The change, and we kind of pegged it to the 1970s, I think. Foley used to be stuff like just footsteps and just cutlery and, you know, teacups down, et cetera, movement. It started to change, I believe, to my mind, in the late 70s, where people were asking for now primary effects. So that is, okay, there's a car crash. Our sound effects guys are covering the car crash. What can you guys get? So we might add a car crash. We would also add a bumper falling off or a hubcap skittering away, those things. But we could also get something for the crash, et cetera. And that opens up a tighter marriage between the Foley stage and cut sound effects.
You're good, Greg.
Okay, the sound design, this is an interesting one, and I kind of like to address this. The meaning of sound design has changed in the late 80s, well, mid 80s even. sound design and sound designers were particular individuals, sound effects editors or general sound gatherers in general, that would take sounds and modify them in some way, typically electronically, to create something new and sparkly and a designed sound, basically. Somewhere along the line, sound designer kind of slipped the meaning and started being used by supervising sound editors because it's number one, it's much sexier. So I'm a sound designer. I'm a supervising sound editor. I mean, which would you pick, right? But, as it gets, and now it's almost to the point where anybody who has even the slightest thing to do with sound is a sound designer. Okay, so that's shy. That's kind of the quick skinny on that one.
Next question.
And TJ Asher from Minneapolis, Minnesota says, since companies are amassing huge catalogs of sound libraries, is there still a future for Foley? How many broken celery sticks are really needed? And he's got a little smiley face.
That's a question that could take days to answer. I'll start it off with, I think in one of my first or second years of doing it, which goes back to the 70s, and somebody had asked me, looked at me and real smugly said, hey, how long do you think your job's going to last? And at the time I thought if I get 2 years out of it, it would be great. And over the years, I've seen more and more of a role as Foley. I do think there is that the performance aspect of what we do on the stage is worthy and is something that people want. So many times a person might be doing, let's say, a low budget film. It's not like they're saying, oh, I'm going to do the same thing when I get more money. It's like, wow, I'm going to have more money to do Foley, because there is that experimentation that can be done. There's the immediacy. I know a lot of people who do Foley talk about performances. Again, there are dancers, actors who sometimes gravitate to Foley. We downplayed that. However, you do have to suffuse yourself in the character, of course, in the story and the drama, etc. And I think that translates over. I think that there's enough people who think that translates over to make it, as I say, worthy. On the Foley stage now, you can carry your own library. So if we do something that we think is fantastic, the mixer will library it. So the stage can run with a whole library. Usually, let's say it's a huge glass crash and all, we can add a track or two of what we have from the library, and we'll also do it again as well. So it'll be sort of a hybrided effect. Foley, nonetheless, but again, with the library that's being carried by the stage. I don't know. I would like to see obviously it go on, but as I say, the only diminution that I've seen in Foley is the amount of time we have to do stuff. The amount of days, the sheer speed that you have to work at now.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
The thing about Foley is that it adds to the character. And this is something that you can't do from a library. I mean, you can spend all day cutting and trying to make little pieces fit, and sync-wise, you probably can accomplish what you want to accomplish. I mean, I can cut footsteps all day long, and I can lay them in, and they'll be in sync. But it's not the same as having a guy saying, okay, well, this is the character of the guy. I have this particular pair of shoes here, that I'm going to use for him through the whole show. And that's part of the character of the person. It's part of the believability of the character and the believability of the film in general. So, I don't think Foley's going to go anywhere. As David said, I think the challenge is going to be that they're going to be strapped for time, and it's going to have to happen faster.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as Greg was saying, it's really a money-saving and time-saving feature is Foley, because you think of it, if you think of all those huge catalogs of sound effects out there, if you're going to just replace the footsteps of somebody that's walking from a concrete thing onto a carpet and then to a marble floor, you've got to audition, thousands of footsteps on concrete, different types of shoes on concrete, different types of shoes on carpet, et cetera, find the ones that you think are right, clip them out, cut them in, synchronize them with each individual foot on the editing software. In the Foley stage, they just roll the video, and the Foley artist performs that stuff. He's got all three surfaces right there in front of him, finds the right pair of shoes to use, and in a matter of just a few minutes, that soundtrack, the sound effects for that scene is completed, and it's in sync. And, it might have to be fine-tuned a little bit by the editors in post, but you can walk away at the end of the day with a whole reel with all the sound effects, all the incidental footsteps and door opens and closes and, incidental sound effects that are normally done in Foley in sync, sounding good, recorded in a clean studio, and they don't have to remove the sounds, the background sounds that are different behind each of those pre-recorded sound effects takes to make them match up. They all match up. So it saves a lot of time and a lot of money in post.
There you go, Sky.
I've had the good fortune of being on several different sound stages and Foley stages. And by the way, David and Greg, I'm honored that I'm getting to hear and listen to your stories. These are treasures. So, but could you give a quick description of what a Foley stage looks like? Because as Courtney was talking about, it's different squares and boxes. And then eventually I've got a question about the closet.
Okay. I can take some of the layout, and of course, every Foley stage is different, and every Foley stage is similar. So, if you could imagine a room, I could say 30 by 40, but maybe more. If you get more, it's great. The surfaces are usually referred to as pits, although you might not want pits literally, because they sound like pits. Do you know what I mean? At a certain point, if they're too small, it's going to sound like what you're walking in. That is a small confined space of rocks, let's say, or what have you. So we preferred more open spaces, not so quite so defined. But on a Foley stage, you would have dirt, gravel. I mentioned a rock pit that was proprietary of Paramount Stage, and it was great. You'd have water pit, at least one, maybe two or three. You'd have a little splash pit, so you can do, let's say, footsteps in the rain. Okay. Wood surfaces are always tricky. It's good to have at least two. More is better. Built-in is good. You would also have portable wood surfaces that you could augment. So if you were doing a Western and there were umpteen wood surfaces, you'd want to be able to differentiate sidewalk from interior, et cetera. The dirt surface, it would be good to be big because you have dirty dirt and clean dirt. Clean dirt would be as you're walking on dirt. But what about mud, making mud? You don't want to do that in the clean dirt that you would have, or you want to mess it up with stuff like forest stuff, and also it can get pretty funky. So a good pit, a good broad pit is that. As far as concrete goes, you can have sidewalk pour and you can have street pour, and there is a different sound like that. And you can have asphalt, and asphalt sounds different than the two of those. So if you have the space and you can plan it, you can do that. You want a lino surface. A good thing there would be to have a lino lay over a concrete and a lino lay over wood. Because if you're in a wood house and want to go to, let's say, the kitchen, you'd want to have a little underpinning of the wood. So that, if you came into a Foley stage, some or all of that would be before you. The screen would be there. You'd have baffles, portable, so that if you're doing exterior sounds, you don't want it to bounce around in interior. So that's up to you and the mixer to make certain that you're not getting the interior bounce. And then you have props, and props is the thing where, again, if you have the space, and we had it at the MGM, and especially at Paramount, I used to like to carry a lot of props. And by that, I mean, take glasses. How many different glasses are there? There are a ton of different glasses, and they sound differently. So why not, if you've got the room, have them? That was always our thought. And the props would... kitchenware, Western, sports. You'd have car parts, car doors, car hoods, things like that. We had an old gas pump that worked really well for spaceships, for crashes and things like that. We had it on a dolly that we could move around. You'd have creaky stuff, chairs creaky. You get your stuff from secondhand stores. In fact, Paramount, and a quick story, we opened the stage at Paramount. We helped design it, and we had very few things, but we had the studio, and we got a truck, a big old flatbed truck, and we went out to where we thought there was a secondhand store, and we found one. I could remember rolling up, and 4 of us jumped out, and we went through that store like locusts. And we just grabbed belts, and the neat thing was that the woman had just taken over ownership of that like the day before, and she had this huge sale because we literally cleaned them out, but we were able to prop our Foley stage. There are other things, but I think those are the basics of what a stage.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nick, go ahead. You were going to say, Greg?
I was just going to say, basically, I think our floor at Paramount was a 5x5 grid of surfaces, of various surfaces. So there was a lot of floor space of different things. And most bigger stages are a small to medium size sound stage.
Yeah, I know that
that's where they come from.
Yeah, our offices are in 3210, which is the old ILM, stage. And I guess the theater used to be a Foley stage, back in the day. And then there is one called the Pit, which is a totally floated room that's a bit smaller, but still very effective. Next question.
David Brady from New York says, Foley is probably one of the last of the old school techniques still employed today. Why is it more convincing than any digital counterpart?
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's mostly because of the fact that it's bespoke to the actual action on screen, and it has character.
Yeah.
And it's the character part that you can't really get from a library or from cutting,
Yeah.
So to me, that's the reason that it's, it still stays. I mean, and digitally, everybody's recording digitally now, Pro Tools, so
Right.
So the recording medium has changed, but really not the process. Everything else is still pretty much the same. They just, the artists like David have to just do it faster.
Yeah, I'd like to think also that comes through again, and effects, especially big ones, but not even that. They're an amalgam. So effects come from a library, and they come from digital, and they come from field recordings of let's say a sound designer, and they also come from the Foley stage, and there could be a mix, but it started out. Jack Foley, whose namesake we do, always talked about performance, and that was at the core of everything I've read about him. Is that he talked about actors and actresses who he had walked, and he talked about different ways that he would get into walking. And I do think that comes through, and I think the nuances that we're able to get on stage, as was said before, come through more easily than you can cut. So
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers from Madison, Wisconsin says, I assume Foley is an ever-changing thing as new products need new sounds. What has been popular or provided a challenge to reproduce?
Have you ever been stumped? Just couldn't figure out how to get a sound that would work?
No.
I think not ultimately. I can remember, David, sometimes that we went back and forth about stuff, and it probably took us longer to find something than we really, ultimately would have wanted. But it was something, and everything was just not doing exactly what we wanted to. So there are those times, but generally, with guys that of the stature of David and Ken, is that no, they're hitting it right out of the box, pretty much first time. And we're not doing a lot of experimentation. And if you get 80%, of the character of the sound right, you can always augment with the other 20% as a sweetener. And we did that. We did that quite a bit. And I can remember Kenny would always grab something. He says, "What does this sound like?" And he'd go do something. Does that sound like anything? That was it. Does this sound like anything?
Do you find yourself constantly playing with things in real life just to see what they sound like? Like, oh, there's I had a problem. I had to render a Chrome ship for a couple years, and so anytime I saw Chrome, I'd be like, like staring at it. And do you find that that you have that where you start listening to how something taps, or listen? Do you find it opens up your ears? I guess is to the world around you, constantly studying it.
That's a good point. Yes, yes, I do. As with, I guess, any sense that you that you focus on, be it taste or visual or what have you. I found that in travel as well, that it just opens up again a whole other layer of attending. What's in the air, what is the call to prayer, and coming from you're just tuned to them. Yes, another thing too about. Yes, you find yourself constantly listening to stuff and finding a unique sound. Again, a chair that creaks that somebody might want to throw out. You say, no, I will take that chair. It will take.
Creaky chairs are very valuable.
Get that chair. And the same though. So let's go back to what we do mostly, and shoes. And I mean, obviously, the most done effect is our footsteps. I contend that it's the hardest thing to do well, because number one, you spend years getting shoes, and then you spend time learning how to walk in the shoe. Do you want to walk on the inside, on the outside, straight up, or whatever? In keeping those shoes, because you'll see the rattiest shoes on a Foley stage, because we don't want to change them. Once they sound good, you tape them up. Gaffer's tape over shoes tons of times. You don't want to change the soles. You don't want to change the heels. If I ever did, I'd have my shoemaker grind down the heel and grind down the sole and basically, deconstruct it a bit to try to get it not to sound like a shoe. So that's what we do. Those are our main things. Even movement, you could say, is the main thing. I don't think we've ever been stumped, because you have at least, well, nowadays stages are less, but let's say 3 people who are thinking about, okay, what can we do with that? And that brings up the communication in the team. Anybody hopefully can say, hey, I got an idea, try this. And the other people will consider that. I think that's a good flow with that. As far as, so we're not usually stumped. There's one story that I wanted to tell too, and it was a Star Trek story. And it was, remember the ship crashing? They came in and just tore up the landscape, and the ship comes in and noses down and goes football fields, acres of destruction, tearing up dirt and trees and boulders and all. And so we made, I'm going to say 24 tracks at least, spaceship and rumbles and dirt and different frequencies of, and silt at the end. And we're playing it back to see what we have to add. And at the very end, we think we got it. And then we said, dang, it's all those trees are going down and they got leaves and we can't hear anything. What are we going to do? And there's a tree outside the Foley stage. I don't know who came up with the idea, but we ran out and we cut down some branches and really took those branches and just whacked the heck out of car doors and things like that. That played on top of 24, 30 tracks of other stuff. It was high enough to get through and it was high enough to sell. So a lot of these times you come up with something really on the fly and they really work. The other thing I want to say real quick is in a Star Trek, when we did the protoplasma, the floating protoplasma, do you remember that one? Mm-hmm. And, that was done with a engine oil can unopened. And, there's a little bit of play with the oil. And Greg, you expanded that sound, but basically we took a couple of cans and manipulated those to get that blobular floating thing. But you elongated that sound in some way.
Well, we used this beautiful pitch shifter from Lexicon, the 2400, which was actually a broadcast compression time expander, compressor expander for regulating the times on TV programming.
Right.
But the pitch shift algorithm was created by this guy, John DeLorto, out of Stanford. Mm-hmm. And it was insane. The best commercially available pitch shifter at the time was made by Eventide, and I'm sure Courtney remembers that one. And it was good, but the problem is it only had a range of plus or minus 15% maybe clean without any glitching.
Right.
Okay, and that was the biggest problem with a lot of the hardware was the glitching in those days, the digital hardware, and this thing was just amazing. I could get an octave clean up or down.
Wow.
It blew my mind. So Lexicon actually made me a unit, or made us a unit without all the other guts, just the pitch shifting. Right. And we bought it, and we were the only people in town that had it, and we used it extensively. But then I found out I could go in, it was a stereo unit. I found out I could go in one side, out of that side, and back into the other side and get 2 octaves clean.
That's great.
It was I mean, the sync, forget about it. Latency, years.
Right.
But it didn't matter because you could lay down each one separately, and then the editors would pull it back into shape. So
that's great. Let's go to the next question.
Helmy Chance from St. Paul, Minnesota says, you must have an incredible Foley library, but for folks new to this, what resources are out there?
Do you use any external, or is it mostly just your library of sound effects that you pull from, or do you have any other outdoor external resources that you use for sound effects to add to your Foley?
No, we produce on the stage what we have. We don't carry anything else. And when I mentioned carrying the library, what I meant by that is that, again, if there's a sound that particularly that required a lot of setup that we really nailed, our mixer could library it. And so the next time use it. Yeah. But the stuff our sounds are the stuff that we create on the stage.
That's great. Next question.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington said, what is the weirdest item in the closet that made a sound that you have used?
Weirdest. Thoughts?
Closet?
I think he's referring to the prop room, which on a stage can literally be a closet. Okay, I'll show you one. I don't know if this quite fits the definition of the and because I have them here, but this, can you see, is part of a 2 horseshoes that you would use. Okay. Yes, exactly. So when you think of horse hooves and you think of guys with coconuts, and that's one way to do it, they don't dampen coconuts. This is, gosh, it's at least 70 years old, maybe 80 years old. This was at MGM when I got there, and it was beat up then. The neat thing about this, and this gets into engineering props as well, which is a whole other thing, but laminated handle, fiberglass cups, rubberized on the inside and all, and they have weight. You want weight with horses, and you play them real hard. And of course you can't breathe with the microphone, so you have to learn how to do that and not breathe. The neat thing about this, though, is that it gives you 4 beats instead of 3. So usually with the horses you get da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but this, if you roll it correctly, and it's almost like drumming, you can get a 4 beat out of it, and that is a richer effect. So that might be one way to answer that question.
And no one's built one that's as good as that one that's 70 years old. That it just has just the right sound.
We took those to the prop guys at the studio, the guys who manufacture props, and we told them, and we said, we want this. Right. You want this. And they're also cut on a bias so that you don't get a cuppy sound. I mean, It was really thought out. And we gave it to them, and it weeks later, we got back something that was just not it, and we concluded, okay, we're keeping these as in as good shape as we can, because we ain't getting another.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, there's just something that all the pieces came together, and it survived that long because it was just the right thing. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I did Foley on a movie called Shogun Assassin, which was a very violent movie. There were a lot of beheadings and arms being chopped off and things like that. It was a lot of samurai action. And we ended up trying to come up with something for all these horrible graphic sound effects of blood. And we ended up with Perrier because it was carbonated. You could shake up the bottle and it would squirt out and then land on a piece of concrete and give you that spattering sound, and the squirting sound of that Perrier coming out from underneath your thumb worked perfectly. We also killed about 400 watermelons in that movie.
Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
Well, that was the question. How much vegetables do you break to make other things sound like other things? And you mentioned watermelons. I've heard of celery. So it was mentioned earlier. I guess that's what I meant by weird. But thank you again. This is outrageously cool.
Let's go to the next question. We got a lot of questions stacking up and running out of time.
What mics do you use for various Foley recording tasks? This is from Jeff Francis in Columbia, South Carolina.
I go ahead, Greg.
Okay. Well, the main thing that we have to consider here is the difference between how the prop or how the effects, sorry about the pop, how the effect sounds to the artist with their ears versus what it sounds like to me through the microphone. So there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen here. And firstly, there's trust that has to be established between the two sides of the glass, much more so than in any other recording situation that I'm aware of. For instance, we managed to come to consensus, pretty quickly. But what we did is we got a bunch of different mics, and we auditioned mics, and we recorded a bunch of stuff with different mics. Then we went back up to the booth and we listened to all the different mics. And it's not just the mics. It's, what kind of system do you have? Everybody in Hollywood at the time had JBL speakers. It was just JBL City, and JBLs were great, not because they were necessarily the best speakers, but because everybody had them. And you knew that your work would translate very easily to any other studio, okay? Because all the monitoring situations were pretty much the same. So we did a bunch of tests, and we tried some Neumanns, we tried some Sennheisers, we tried some what else did we do? We had a Sheps on the stage and everything, and we ended up with probably the most popular Foley mic of all times, the Neumann KMR 81, a short shotgun, about this long. And it's a very sweet sound for a shotgun. It's much sweeter than any of the Sennheisers, for instance. It's sweeter than the Sheps. And it's got a roundness to it that's really nice. And it was much closer to what, for instance, David and Ken would kind of hear between their ears and in their mind's ear, versus what was now playing over the speakers. So that was really our main mic, and we had a pair of those. But we would, from time to time, we would also go to either cardioids or hypercardioids, usually Sennheiser MKH 40 or 50. Those are our primary mics.
And non-technically, there's usually two mics running on the stage. Let's say one close to one room, so perspective can be achieved. Also, in terms of lavaliers or PCMs and such, those are utilized. Sometimes we would put them in condoms and drop them down in water to try to get a water mic, for instance. For avalanches, you can bury a lavalier in a nice place if you have a rock pit and drop rocks on it. So you've got a couple of different mics picking that up, but that lav is going to just give you an incredible sound, being rock perspective, as it were.
And we used to use the ECM 50, the old ECM 50, because of its durability. So yeah, it would survive anything. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I used to use an ECM 50 under a plastic wading pool, underneath the bottom of it for underwater splash sounds. But what you say, a lot of times, and I haven't done Foley in decades, so my experience is fairly limited as to what microphones were used. We almost used 416s a lot because that would give you a good close-up sound. And a lot of times you'll record sound effects closer to get more detail, and then you'll take it down in level and mix it lower in level, but that detail will still remain, and you wouldn't get that detail with the mic like 4 or 5 feet away as it would be in the normal perspective for the shot. So a lot of times as was mentioned, you can record two microphones simultaneously, 2 different perspectives, and they can choose in post where to mix it and where to cut it for the different perspective. And you have them in sync, that performance in sync at 2 different perspectives, and they don't have to worry about performing it twice in sync. So that is one of the attributes. And if you have a Foley room that is dead quiet, it has no echoes in it or no reverberation, they add that usually in post digitally these days to match the environment that the person is in. So they record them clean, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But and the directionality of a microphone, like a short shotgun, like the Neumann or the Sennheiser 416 or even 816s, gives you the ability to move something slightly off axis and to have it go sharp sound and then kind of a dull sound to get a more distant sound just by moving the microphone slightly during the take to get to lose that detail or the sparkliness as you move the microphone.
Absolutely. Next question.
Courtney Gooden in Hollywood says, with so much post-SFX creation and editing being done on a desktop now, have Foley studios disappeared from most post-sound facilities?
No, it doesn't. Doesn't seem like they have. Go ahead, David. You were going to say something.
No, actually, I think there are ebbs and tides with this studio-based versus, I shouldn't say versus studio-based and then independent stages. At Warner's, which was the last stop, we had 2 Foley stages. At high season, they each worked day and night, 2 shifts each, and also on the weekends as well. So we were putting out, 12, 14 sessions a week on high studio. And now, and I was just at a kind of a Foley gathering, but it seems like there's an uptick in independent stages. So, the numbers may be the same or even more locations change a bit.
Next question.
Mickey Makachor from the Philippines says, what makes for a great FO stage build? Does the space between the floor and the foundation matter?
I go, Greg.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, typically you're going to want to have significant space between the floor and either the foundation or the ground, so that you can actually have pits. David talked a little bit about this earlier, but the most important one typically would be the dirt pit. And if you want that dirt pit to actually be continuous or contiguous even all the way to the ground. There's a very famous stage. You guys remember John Resch? He was on the show once before.
Yeah.
His old stage in LA was called Taj, and they were on the second floor. And I don't know if this was true. Maybe David knows if it's true, but I was told that they had a concrete column that was built from the second floor all the way down that actually connected with the earth for their dirt pit.
Wow.
I had heard the same story. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's to keep from any reverberations happening, between the floor.
That's always a tricky thing. And that's why if a dirt pit is big and deep, let's just say that, as deep as you can get it, then you're not going to get that reverberation. It won't sound, in other words, like you're walking on dirt on a concrete in a pit. And that's why I've always advocated for the largest pits you can get, because it takes away from a pitty sound. There was one film I saw, a foreign screening, and it was the only film I've ever seen where within the first minute, people were knocked out of the film because the Foley, number one, was recorded way hot, and number two, it was colonial Sri Lanka. It sounded like what they were doing, which is walking on maybe 12 by 12 wooden squares loudly. And that film could not get that audience back after 60 seconds. So,
and then if I can, Alex, just one very quick story, and I'm sure Mickey will appreciate this one. We built a Foley stage at this Bigfoot facility in Cebu, which is where Mickey and I met. And originally there were three stages to be built. There was an ADR stage, a Foley stage, and a dubbing stage, a mixing stage. And the ADR stage and the mixing stage were built on a floating floor system. Okay, which is perfect for that. The Foley stage was not, because it's not desirable for that. We want to be able to get down. At the last minute, they changed the location of the ADR and the Foley stage after the shell had already been built. So now the Foley stage had to be built on a floating floor. And it was up to me to build this stage in one of the worst possible conditions possible. Every time you jumped, the entire floor vibrated. It was, yeah. So it was really, really tough, and I had to construct above ground pits because it would destroy the floor. It was kind of a mess, and they actually kind of worked as long as you didn't do your Foley too hard. Like if you did really light steps, because if you jumped, number one, the pit would bottom out. Number two, you'd get this huge kind of rumble from the floating floor. So it does kind of matter.
Absolutely. Next question.
Jeff Francis from Columbia, South Carolina asks, how is it decided which team covers each sound needed? Foley, Cut FX?
The supervising editor or the Foley editor, and Foley editors is something that evolved over the last 40 years. We'll get cue sheets, and the cue sheets typically are, go track by track, of course, and you have however many tracks for each character, main character and main secondary characters, and then backgrounds, pass-bys, pass-by sometimes in front of the camera and then behind the camera, and then crowd sounds. And then it moves to props, usually small to large. Maybe your first track is hand pats, and you could go through a whole film and do hand pats, handshakes, that kind of stuff on desk, etc. Then moving to things like, let's say, cutlery, smaller stuff, hand props, glasses, bottles, cigarettes and such, and then moving to crashes and buildings falling and the larger stuff and all that. That is typically the way it might be laid out, and that's laid out by the editor. There are, and I wanted to pick up on one thing too that has been mentioned a few times, and that's just the teamwork involved in it and the communication, because you've got different ears in different places of the stage. So what sounds good to us on the stage may not sound good to Greg as a mixer. And when we hear something, we might want to say, no, we could tweak it. We might have an idea to add something to. So there's a flow with that, as there might be if somebody brings a cue sheet in and we see something on the screen and say, hey, we can make something for that. And they have to be, again, it's communication. That's really important, and especially with the Foley team.
And I would say that just the basic rule of thumb would be, if it moves or is moved, Foley will cover it.
Right. Interesting. Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis says, is it critical still to nail the timing of Foley performances, or is it now just a case of making the desired sound and letting editors match up the sound to the on-screen action?
Quick answer, yes. Yes, it is back in the day before digital and such. And we work with Frank Warner, who did Coming Home and Raging Bull and Close Encounters of a Third Kind, et cetera, et cetera. And Frank was on that vibe that we're talking about of making the sound great. And we do something and he'd say, oh, that's terrific. And we'd say, Frank, we got to do it again. We got to get better singing. No. My editors will cover it. That was back. I'm going back 50 years or so now on that. So, of course, digital makes that process even better. And I think that people can personally get hung up in sync and getting it right. A good editor, even a not so good editor, can put Foley into sync. That's fine and that's easy. But it's go for the feel before you go for the sing.
Yeah, that's great. Greg, David, thank you so much for your time. Just fantastic to have you here.
And thank you guys. This was really, really a pleasure.
It's a fantastic and amazing art that most of us don't get to see. Someday we're going to have to get into a Foley stage and do it live and have people see it actually happen. So we'll talk to you guys about figuring out how we do that, because I really I think people have to experience it. And again, I've only gotten to see little bits of it in person, and then obviously I follow folks on TikTok and other folks that are Foley artists that post them doing it, and it just seems like the best job ever. So anyway,
it was a lot of.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to the producers for all the great questions, keeping it all rolling forward. Thanks to the panelists for the great answers and the great conversation. We can't do this without you. We had a great day here. Thanks to the Tlaloc traversal. This is how many miles we covered between the answers and the questions. 87,000 miles, or 140,000 kilometers that it would have taken for everybody to be in one place to do this. So thanks to the team that makes all this possible in the back end. And now we're going to jump into After Hours, and a reminder that Ken Jordan will be talking web development. So this is the quiet room, but we can now see Foley now.
One of the best shows ever that we've done.
IMDb says that David.
That's nice. That's nice, Alex. Could you give me just a little more high end out of that thing?
David has
I want to do that. I want to do that. Where are you located? Can I come and visit?
Trying to open the door.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's more reverb. I'm stuck.
Do we lose Dave? We lost him. He's probably on the stage.